Hi everyone, so sorry. Just want to check. Am I clearly audible now?
Yep, loud and clear.
Thank you so much. All right, so I'm just gonna share the screen first. All right, so but please do cut me off if in any moment my connection is bad and then I suddenly disappear. Anyways, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce all of the judges that is going to judge the Open Grand Finals for NOVED 2025. So let's start with the first judge. The first judge is going to be Jonathan Randall from University of British Columbia, a very great list of achievements. They were the grand final judge at India pre-ABP Open, the final judge, the ESL final judge for Zagreb pre-EUDC, the Open semi-final judge for Sriram pre-ABP, the Open final judge for Atma Open 2025, Open semi-judge for IFA 2025, the champion and third best speaker of LDBE 2021. Oh, so sorry. All right, thank you. And the champion of Alsa UI 2021 high school and the champion for Compact UI 2022. Continuing is our second panel, which is Retno Wulandari from Universitas Gadjah Mada. They were an invited adjudicator for HELP ADC 2025, the best judge on CDPT pre-ABB 2020, the breaking judge for UADC 2022, the EFL finalist ABB in 2021, and the EFL semi-finalist at Nepal Austral 2021. The third judge is Steffi Maureen Wijaya, one of our independent institutional independent judge from Universitas Kristen Petra. They were an open semi-finalist NUDC 2024, open semi-finalist UCDC International 2025, second runner-up of NTDC 2025, and an IA for PGTC Online 2025, IWGM AP 2025, as well as PET 2025. Next, we have the Jessica Verdinado from Universitas Diponegoro. They were the grand finalists and open ninth best speaker of NUDC 2022, first runner-up of Alsa UI and USU Open 2022, the IA for NOVED 2023 until 24 and 2025, the IA for IVED 2023 and 2024, the CAP of NSDC 2024, breaking judge of Indo-Pacific pre-ABP, Diliman, EIDC, NHS DLCBP Open on 2024, the CAP of IFA 2025, and the CAP of MXDC 2025. We also have Vieri Adi from Universitas Lambung Mangkurat, co-overall best speaker of KDN 2025, NUDC 2022 bronze medalist, novice final judge of NUDC 2021, NUDC 2024, and NOVED 2024. We also have Yehezkiel Moranello from Universitas Pajajaran, novice champion William and Mary APDA debate 2025, open champion Intertext Pro Ams 2025, grand finalist Gadjah Mada Eloquentia pre-NUDC 2025, and breaking judge Yale IV 2024, Pro Ams 2025, and NUDC 2024. Lastly, let's welcome the chair for the Open Grand Finals for NOVED 2025, UT Ariel from Universitas Katolik Indonesia Atma Jaya Jakarta. They were the EFL semi-finalists on WUDC 2021, Open pre-quarter finalist and fourth EFL best speaker of ABP 2022, EFL champion, EFL grand final best speaker, and third best EFL speaker of Australs 2022, Open Grand finalists of NUDC 2021, Open Grand Final judge on NOVED 2024, and Sunway AP 2025. They were also the top 10 best judge on NOVED 2024, IFA 2025, and IFA 2024. And lastly, they were the double octo finals chair on UADC 2020. So for all of that, I just want to congratulate and welcome all of the wonderful chair and the panelists that is going to judge for the Open Grand Finals for NOVED 2025. What I also want to clarify is that for everyone here, we would really advise try to explain to everyone that we would hope that the debate for the Open Grand Finals NOVED 2025 should be recorded. On behalf of the CAP, I think having recorded debates, especially finals recordings, are proven to be very beneficial for future generations of debaters. But we understand that because of the heading and because of the motion, maybe there are some people that are uncomfortable if you are being recorded. What we suggest is maybe you can use initials. You do not have to open your camera while debating as well. Hopefully, all of these suggestions can be taken by all of the debaters, just so we can proceed with the recording throughout the final round for NOVED 2025. So that's what, on behalf of the CAP, that's what I want to reiterate. Hopefully, everyone are willing to consent with their speeches to be recorded. I would just like to remind everyone, the recordings are going to be very beneficial for the future debaters. Hopefully, once the chair is going to ask everyone's consent, everyone would be fine with being recorded for this final speech or final round. So best of luck for all of the teams and best of luck for the judges as well as the chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Ariel. Excited to chair NOVED 2025's Open Grand Final. I'm going to do a roll call first, as well as request all of the teams to stand their speaking order and state the government. Are you here and complete?
OG here.
Okay. Opening opposition.
Yeah, we can send.
Okay. Closing government. Closing government, are you here?
Oh, sorry,
Yes.
we're here.
Okay. Closing opposition.
Here.
Here.
I'm gonna roll call the judges first. Randall, are you here?
Here.
Okay, Retno, are you here? I'm here. Okay, Steffi?
Here.
Okay, JJ?
Here.
Vieri?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Yehezkiel?
Here, Kak.
Okay, rechecking the recordings, EP concepts, OG concepts, you present rate. For me, we're gonna fully record around. Allow me to officially start. Welcome to the NOVED 2025 Open Grand Final. Congratulations for all 4 teams for making it up until this far. And hopefully you give your best so that we are able to see a really great debate. I think the judges' introductions have already been made, but I'm not going to be alone. So throughout the round, if you want to refer to the judges, please refer to the panel as a whole. Understandably, the motion may be a bit sensitive, but that's why I do want to remind everyone, yes, the round is recorded, but generally to also please ensure that you do not violate equity in any shape or form, and let's have a really good round. To open the NOVED 2025 Open Grand Final, under the motion that reads as the feminist movement, this house celebrates the democratization of pornography. We call upon the feminists are here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yep.
Okay. Guess it is the grand finals, even if the motion is like this. So let me open my camera. All right. Just before I start, quick disclaimer that everything I say is for the sake of debate. I am a cishet man, so my views do not reflect the overall views of the feminist movement, nor of women in general. With out of the way.
Could you state your PRI preference?
Oh yeah, POI preferences, unmute, raise hand, or chat will be fine, and pronoun to him. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, and 1. It is not the place of the feminist movement to tell women what to do. Its task is to support women and ensure that they get the freedom that was denied to them for so long. The comparative under opposition side of the house is not a world where porn doesn't exist or that everybody has unlimited sexual freedom. It's one where porn exists, but it's controlled by certain individuals, often men, who have the power to mete out contracts towards vulnerable women and to exploit them for their own profits, with very little of those profits actually going towards those women. We said democratization was good because it dismantled this system from start to end, and that's why we propose. I want to set up two things. One is the comparative of porn being exclusive. I think this manifests in two ways. A, in the pragmatic sense, that is to say that porn isn't broadly accessible at the point in which there's only a few producers within certain regions and maybe doesn't exist in other regions. For example, it's more likely there's more producers in more liberal regions of the world, not in more conservative ones. We also think it's about the access, given that back then, the access to porn was not online, given the internet didn't exist, for instance, and all of these things. I think B, it's societally speaking as well, as in porn was something that was very, very taboo back then and has now increasingly become normalized. We'll explain to you how the process of this happened, but under op, they also have to explain why having that taboo towards porn is something that is good. And I also want to explain very quickly why it's likely that porn is still going to exist under opposition. Because regardless of what you do as the feminist movement or as women, there's always going to be a market for porn, insofar we're always going to have gooners, for instance, and men who want to channel their sexual desires, but they don't have a wife or they don't have a partner and things like that. So that market's going to exist. The question is whether that market is going to serve women well, insofar that they're always going to be a part of it. But the second thing I want to set up is this House celebrates. I think this House celebrates motion is basically just a this House supports motion. So we want to explain why this is something that's necessarily in line with the benefit or the sort of interest of the feminist movement. Before I move on to anything else, sure.
So even if there's always a killer, we don't have to have law in order to condemn killers?
I'm sorry, what did you say? You cut off.
Even if there's always a killer, we don't have to condemn killers?
But like the problem is that with a killer, you're hurting people, and that's why we have laws to prevent from hurting people. But in porn, it's not inherent within the sort of action for it to be necessarily harmful or hurtful. We'll explain why that is. And in fact, that's worse under your side when porn is something that's exclusive and taboo. Again, I'll explain that. Be patient. 2 points. Firstly is why we make access to porn easier, and that's a good thing. And then secondly, that we give back the control of production towards women. Firstly is on access to porn being easier. We reduce 2 key barriers in the access to porn. A, we reduce the societal barrier insofar that more and more people are consuming and producing porn, and therefore there is discussion about what kind of porns are reasonable, what is reasonably expected from the sexual fantasies of a person, for instance, and all of these things. I think it's also more reasonable for someone to pursue producing porn as a career now, especially with the advent of platforms like OnlyFans, for instance, which has been proven to provide a lot of financial support for certain women, for instance, and these kinds of things that I think makes it so that it's not as taboo as it used to be before. Whereas on the opposition, this was something that was very, very taboo, given that you had to go to your local shady corner store in order to access that kind of porn to begin with, and that you needed to know certain kinds of people and be in a certain market in order to access the producers, which means it was very far removed from normal society under opposition. But B, I think it's also about the financial barrier to get started. It's very likely that, for instance, if you are not able to find a producer, then either you have to do things yourself, which I think is quite expensive because you have to handle all the things like publishing and filming and recording, for instance, which not a lot of women can access. And I think this manifests then in 2 ways under our side of the house. That is to say, A, I think it grants access for women who are not conventionally attractive, but want to produce porn of themselves to be able to access that under a government side of the house. Because the thing is that you can't discount the sexual freedom that individuals want to pursue, given that and that's not necessarily something that's tied to their conventional attractiveness and things like that. I think people, especially given the context that women were always forced to be demure or pushed down to serve the interest of the men, for instance, I'm not taking that yet, or maybe never. That's why these women also deserve to have their own kind of sexual freedom. It's not our place to say that that's something that's wrong. We just need to support them within that sort of pursuit. But B, I think it also grants access to women to watch porn and to access porn as a consumer as well. I think, again, this is equally important given the idea of sexual freedom and how these individuals express themselves. I think that porn can be very, very enlightening for certain groups of people to understand what they're really into, for instance, especially if they are been struggling around that for a very long while. On the comparative, when it's something that's taboo and something that's probably expensive, which again, because of the economic inequalities in our world right now, a lot of women simply don't have access to, they're not able to access this degree of sexual freedom. And I just want to note again, the other reason why sexual freedom is necessarily important for the feminist movement is because there's always been a double standard. That's to say that men always get the same kind kind of sexual freedom, if not more. They're able to have many wives. They're able to choose which wives to marry. They're able to dictate what happens in the bedroom. It's less taboo for somebody to goon and to watch porn as a man, for instance. And these things, I think, is inherently discriminatory to women who might want to access those same things as well. And democratization of porn has made that increasingly possible for these women, and that's why we support that as the feminist movement. But the second point is how we give back the controlled production to women. And what I want to talk about is contract making with producers. There's two inherent reasons why contract making is far, far worse on the opposition side of the house. A, because it's taboo, so there's no transparency to the contracts that are being made. Lawyers don't want to pick up your case, for instance, because they think it might ruin their career if they're not already specialized within that sort of thing, or they just focus on other cases which are less taboo and probably more profitable anyway. Whereas on the comparative side, it also means like less societal discourse on that kind of thing. People don't talk about how abusive producers are towards porn stars, for instance, because it's something that's inherently taboo. On the comparative side of the house, this something becomes normalized over time. That's to say that we start talking more about the porn industry and how well it's operating itself. Lawyers are more likely to pick up cases because they become high-profile cases, insofar that there's a lot of consumers that depend on that kind of producer, and maybe there's a distribution platform like OnlyFans involved in that as well. That becomes something much more incentivized for society and lawyers to pick up on. That inherently increases more check and balances towards producers to make sure that the contracts that they're making are actually good. But B, I think because the women are dependent on the company and the producer, given the lack of access towards platforms on the opposition side of the house, if you don't pick up the contract by this one company, then it's unlikely you have any chances at anything else. The comparative on our side is you have a variety of platforms to pick from. If one is particularly abusive, for instance, or you don't like it, then you can always go to the mainstream platforms that often have more sort of like well thought out regulations that protect the women and the producers and the porn stars as well. The platforms again like OnlyFans or Pornhub. Two impacts of this. I think A, more profits towards these women. On the comparative, often these profits were sucked into the producers who took most of the dividends and then gave very little towards these porn stars, for instance, again, because of the dependency and because of the lack of the capability of these women to fight legally speaking. B, I think it's also safer given that the comparative side on their side is the increasing amount of abuse, for instance, because these women cannot escape the contracts that they have made under opposition side of the house. On the comparative, we're able to choose the platform that best services us. We're also able to opt out of those platforms if they end up being abusive and pursue other platforms to be able to do those things. And I think it's important insofar the feminist movement cares about the safety of its individuals, regardless of whatever they pursue. And if we are able to guarantee that under government, then we should. Thank you.
Thank the Prime Minister for that speech. To start opposition side of the house, we call upon the leader of Syria. Leader of opposition.
Yes, sorry, hold on. Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay. For POI, I would like it if you just unmute yourself. Just a trigger warning before I go in. Just make sure that this is all just for the sake of the debate. And I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Imagine when you're feeling disempowered as a woman and you see the feminist movement celebrating pornography being democratized, then thinking that maybe women in porn are not that bad, going in only to be put in the spotlight, degraded in the way patriarchy views women, and what you have is not empowerment of women, but the celebration and objectification of women in which women are sex objects. But instead of a select few that already consent and know the risk is becoming more accessible for you, I think this is the world that the government is trying to put into our world today, right? Before I go into my points then, I'm going to talk about the stance of the opposition, right? I think, right, what we mean here is that we don't see democratization of porn as feminist achievement to be celebrated. So we don't think that it's something to be celebrated about, but it's something that we're sure that women inside are existing, but we just don't want to celebrate it, right? Before I go into my points then, few points of responses that I will go give to the OG. First of all, is that they say that porn will be less taboo, but we say that we just think that porn is not as taboo as it is in this modern world. It's just not something that you will watch in public, you know? Like porn webs are already very accessible. people will still watch porn and will continue to do so. So, but as the feminist movement, it's just something that we don't want to be celebrated, because the problem is not the woman in porn, but the democratization, where it becomes more accessible for both men and women, especially when women they're targeted to create porn because they're the most vulnerable. The feminist movement empowers on the independence of women, and it is the moral viewpoint for many women in the world. And we think that this is just something that the feminist movement will just not endorse, right? Secondly, is that they said that women that are not conventionally attractive can make porn of their own. But we see that why exactly is this important for these women to feel empowered just because they're showing their body in this kind of spaces? So what's the point of making women who are not conventionally attractive to make porn of their own for validation then? So thirdly, that they said that the feminist movement will more protect the women because the feminist movement will support. But we think that feminist movement is not in the room to regulate and protect women, because the moment that space is dominated by men, well, where porn audiences are mostly men and all that, right? So we think that the feminist movement itself should not give all of their resources and all their things in order to regulate and protect women in this kind of disadvantageous situation, instead of just protecting women from opting in the first place if they don't understand the risk first, right? Going into my arguments, I have 2 points that I will talk about today. First of all, the principle of pornography, where it is objectifying women, and secondly, why the empowerment through pornography is bad. Going into my first point then, on the principle of pornography is objectifying women. Why is this true? One, I think we need to contextualize what the feminist movement would want, right? We want gender equality, but we're more focused on women because historically, women has been disenfranchised, right? Historically, what we have been fighting for are first, the same rights for men and women, for example, the same right to vote and all that. Secondly, which is important, is trying to escape the narrative that women are sex objects and men satisfiers, opposing the objectification of women. And thirdly, is increasing the value of women being important in society. Why do we say that this feminist movement of what we're trying to fight for this far is important? Is because what we have been fighting for is the view of women being seen as something as an actor that is important in society and not just sex objects, right? Women have to be empowered, yet we're going to if we're going to celebrate the democratization of pornography, then we're going to erase all that efforts that we're trying to erase the notion that women are sex objects. What's important? 3 things. One is that pornography is inherently objectification, right? We think that right now the standard and highlight of porn are always women because they're more subjected to it, because the audience of pornography are mostly men. That's what we see today, right? Second is that pornography or patriarchal is going to be mostly portraying fantasies of men that are inherently right now are about degrading women because of many reasons. For example, right now the because men are the main actors of the audiences of pornography, is things that are portrayed in porn are things that are arousing to men, and not a portrayal that we would want to be associated to women. Thirdly, then, the moment that the feminist movement celebrates it is the moment that we go back to step 1, in which we have not yet erased that notion that women are sex objects. Second, then, on why the empowerment through pornography is bad. Why is this true? 2 points. One is the wrong empowerment. Because women in pornography, if we're talking about the democratization where it's more accessible for many women, they're feeling empowered not because they're women, but because they have sex value. If we empower through porn, it's because they feel like having sex value is meaning that they're more accepted, they're more loved, and they're more empowered. The moment that you give this kind of empowerment through pornography is the moment that you think that women's bodies are the only thing that makes this woman feel empowered. Second, then, on the illusion of independence, we feel like there's more control because the reason why they have to show their bodies are the feminist movements are trying to celebrate this democratization of porn, and it's because it's just an option for them. So feminist movements are what women view as ideal, for example, what will happen is that we're going to push women to opt in as well because they think it's, oh, it's just okay to show my body. It's empowerment. But we think that is not empowerment exactly because it's the empowerment of having sex value and not being women themselves. Why is this important then? We think that the moment that the feminist movement is endorsing on porn as empowering, is not only misleading these women, but also erasing the feminist movement's efforts to erase bad notions of women in the past. This is going to be a setback for feminist movement and is going to bring back that patriarchy, especially right now when men already think that women are sex objects. And the moment that pornography becomes more accessible, they're just going to say, hey, we're right. Women are already opting into sex work. Oh, that's the reason why maybe women are sex objects after all, because there are many women that because it's accessible for many women to opt in to be sex workers in pornography. So what happens is that we're going to go back to step one, and this is not something that the feminist movement would want, especially in this kind of situation. Which that said, so proud to oppose.
We thank the leader of for that speech. To continue the debate, we call upon the speaker. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yep, you're audible.
All things are for the debate purposes only, and any pronouns, yeah, pure iteration, please. No verbal. Wait a second. It is not your place to decide whether porn is principally offensive for people. Insofar, what feminist movement is for is to make sure that you can advocate for women's rights, to make sure that women inside of the industry can be protected with a good regulation, right? It is not their moral high ground to judge these women that have different stories to begin with on why they start their porn journey, for example. This is why people are going to do this, is that probably not everyone, but insofar there are women that have interest of doing this, we have all the rights to protect these women that has been exploited by the male gaze for in the end of the day. But why the one came out to kick OO from the debate? Because all they're saying is that why women should not be seen as a sex object. I think, Judge, what we can posit is that women as a sex object is not a narrative that comes from women on how people want to be perceived in the first place. What does this mean? This narrative came from on how people perceive this, and it needs to be eradicated because it's not supposed to be something taboo or guilty if you feel if you have need sexually, right? Because I think we're talking about human that still have like a lot of things to be complicated to begin with. Because why does this become particularly important to the debate? Sexuality is somehow a complex spectrum that individuals need to be comfortable with themselves, and this requires a lot of internalization to do so. Insofar that they cannot provide on how to express this mentality healthily, you cannot win or to be comfortable with yourself. Therefore, what exists in the opposition is that women are probably going to be seen as sexually frustrated, or they are not able to express this healthy because they feel guilty and they don't want to be seen put on the same situation as men. Whereas it's probably where probably the context is that this is something that a basic has in the end. I think they deserve all this kind of empowerment to make sure they're able to express this. But three things that I'll explain is my speech. One, why this is important to celebrate it actively. Second, on what it becomes to like diversity optics, but lastly going to talk about intersectionality. First thing, why is this good for the movement? I think simply on three things. One, I think this is the actual actualization of what feminist movement is, to make sure that they can include everyone that is not inseparable. What does this mean? A lot of people seeing women that are working in porn industry are seeing them as somewhat lower because they have somewhat a double standard. This looks like on society when we check on men having a lot of girlfriends, they'll see it as really cool person. But if you are a woman that have like a lot of male friends, you'll be you'll be calling slurs by saying there's a lot of something. This is not something productive, right? This is a stigma that need to be erased in so far that we need to make sure that people have their change of state of mind. How is this going to actualize in the end? I think by actively giving this celebration of support to this particular woman, this is awareness that this is actually okay, especially like pushing a normalization toward this. What does this mean? It creates a mind for the to the people that it is much more aware of how people do a certain thing, especially on how they want to explore their sexuality. Meaning that it puts for things to change structurally or internally in regulation. That now there are going to be much more policy that came, and so far that much more protection have never been recovered from like those because they're labeled as cat-like district job that is still so really unsafe. And so far that this man that came looking for a woman can just hurt a client because they want to, this is something that we want to prevent because this kind of profession are going to be really risky in the end. And but the context is that this one probably don't have any choice to make sure they can do better things to begin with. But second, I think this is exactly how we want to control the man to reclaim the narrative, right? Because now all women are seeing a sexual object is all coming from the man. Therefore, if we can flip this and by explaining that on how this women can control to men, I think we already won this debate. But how does this actually manifest that? I think in so far that all the market coming from probably like incel or men that are sexually frustrated also. I think this is where people can make demands and this is how they can manipulate it. And so far that get money, I think this is still a net good for this woman because they're structurally going to has already been exploited by this man in the end of the day. But second thing that I'll talk about is going to be diversity. I think a lot of barrier exist because in order to do porn, you'll need to be like attractive. But what's important is to find the optics that now that every people can do so, but you're probably going to be plus size or having acne, for example. This is exists as a part of like market in the end of the day. This is an empowerment that is important for the people. What does this mean? This is relevant and so far that a lot of porn that exists in Southeast Asia are mostly centered to a specific woman like hyper-feminine woman that you see in Japanese porn. This pretends, they extend the delta of normalization to make sure that consumption is going to be much more diverse, or even women are not going to feeling guilt anymore to consume this. Therefore, they can have much more freedom that is real liberation. But what does this mean to the movement is two things. One, you manifested one step further for women full liberation because now you can exist at the same standing to men even to the extent of sexualization. But second, it empowers the ally of people that make sure they can able to do this. Risky.
Even with the normalization, how do you prove that people will shift incentives to not objectify and not sexually degrade women in this
I
in this
don't
process?
think that's going to be really important. I think sure that can happen, but what's already important is how we can fix on how these women think about themselves to not make them feel guilty. I think this already like way out, especially in every urgency that probably opposition going to say about like backlashing the movement. I don't think it's going to backlash. This is how women can gain respect to make sure they can stand in a better standing as men. But lastly, let's talk about intersectionality. Why the access of protection can manifest well or later on how people can advocate this nicely. I think it's simply, and we can hijack this on two ways, right? One, probably people of color, especially women of color, already have much more incentive to do this. And so far, they've already been discriminated because they probably don't sympathetically as those people that blonde or have blue eyes because they're thought as a good genes, or even LGBT people that have the incentive to do this because they want to make people have a much more safe sexual exploration condition. What does this mean is that it's going to be better protection. And so far, there are much more actors to make sure that the process of protection is going well. This means that feminization of media can also happen. And so far, a lot of things in the media are masculinization, where people need to be protected to be a demure situation. I think this is a hyper masculinity. Therefore, the media need to be feminized through this and through this democratization. Proud to propose.
We thank the DPM for that speech. To continue, we call upon the Deputy Leader of here.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, Tapi clear kan ya nggak ada like other noises because there's currently a wedding behind us right now.
Yeah.
Okay, before that, disclaimer, trigger warning, just in case I say something that is triggering. But also, since it is recorded, if my parents see this, please know I don't watch porn, so I don't know what I'm talking about. Please, it's just for the debate. POIs unmute, pronouns they, them, but anything is okay to be honest. Okay, I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think the frame in this debate is that we have to protect as much as possible, like women and gender minorities, as best as possible. It's not to get back or to get a form of redemption or retribution, insofar that I think it's quite evil to equate their struggles that is like structural and like across generations to having like bigger porn market. I think it's not like equitable, right? But 3 responses towards OG, right? I think firstly on like prioritizing profits for women is neither like empowering or equalizing for 3 reasons. A, I think the financial support for women is not just porn, and I don't think that it should be reinforced that their only option is porn, right? It's actually not that profiting anyway, which is why like OnlyFans creators gatekeep their content as exclusive as possible, because any paywall breach is devastating. Don't ask me how I know that. But also B, I think it's also absurd on allowing unconventionally attractive women to create or access porn and frame it as a feminist win, right? Because let's flip this. I think it's going to be worse under your side of the house, because you reinforce that even despite being ugly, you're still worth it, but that's only because you have sex value, insofar that like people still get horny when they see you, and it stops there. It doesn't extend farther from that, which is like what women is all about, right? Which what feminism tries to portray best as possible. But also I question the urgency on like what they then get from accessing porn more freely do anyway for like equality or whatever feminist issues that exist. Insofar that exactly porn will still exist under both sides of the house, I think the types of porn varies itself. I think we're gonna bite the bullet that not being able to keluar doesn't harm feminism in its like core principle, right? But also see, I think we're gonna be like completely charitable that more profits is good, but there are 2 reasons why you cannot buy this. In that A, feminists itself will oppose this and be disappointed, because like they're gonna be hopeless, because this clashes with the identity and the like the doctrine that has been passed through generations that this is not what we want, right? I think that they're gonna be hopeless that the only profitable like easy way to be financially independent is through porn, right? Because the thing about like anything that is championed by feminism, people will take it at face value. They're not going to consider the other structural issues that they're like supporting as something that is equal, right? They're still going to see that, oh, feminists like support porn. That's all that feminism will be for them, right? Therefore, that you actually minimize the kind of options that women are open to and should be able to access, right? But also B, I think the stigma exists regardless of how mass spread it is under use of the house with the democratization, because it inherently comes from you as a woman, like that sense of uncomfortability. Because like you're as a woman, you're gonna question like, why am I flaunting my body and commodifying it for standards that I do not know like where it came from, right? But also you're gonna question like, why is the value of my body and sexual desires capitalized? Does that mean that I am only worthy when people want to buy my OnlyFans? This is the kind of like a narrative that's going to be very dominant under the side of the house, right? Because understand that in this world currently, for feminism, for feminists, I think your body is the only tool that women like have as remote control as possible to promote shallowing being a woman to just that. Therefore, you're going to start to question yourself, start to question your position in the movement itself. Therefore, you're gonna have a lot of like overhead burden to like want to go through that very like struggling fight that feminists have to face, right? But moving on to the second rebuttal then regarding like, oh, sexuality needs to be internalized for the movement. I think 3 responses why you shouldn't buy this is that A, insofar that we agree it has to be internalized because it's like something that is within yourself. But I think capitalism is not a good influence in having a good environment to explore your sexuality, right? Insofar that you're going to be very subject to trends, exactly because of diverse consumption. For example, if what Hayckal is saying, like Japanese women, hyper feminine, so on and so forth, is the current trend right now, then people are going to want to like suit their sexuality to fit that, right? They're not going to want to fit to Indonesian trends of hyper femininity. I don't know. But also B, you have to rely on porn under yourself the house exactly because it's pushed on your face as the source for your internalization. Insofar that if you do not use commercial porn as the reference and as the validation for your individuality, like sexuality, then your internalization is a deviation from what is socially acceptable, right? And this is what's going to be reinforced with the democratization. But also see, I think self-acceptance as a woman shouldn't be based on sexuality, insofar that there are other parts to just like being able to have sex and have have sex. But also, I think like you're gonna deviate the focus from other structural issues that women are doing, exactly because people taking this at face value. But also, lastly, then on sex workers seen as less, I think it's not true simply because there's more doesn't mean that they are accepted. Because at the end of the day, you're looking for acceptance from men, not from other women. But also, I think the differentiation between celebrating and acknowledge is different, and this is the prerequisite for better policies, right? But moving on to my extension, then, firstly on sex workers regulation. I think let's characterize like in like right now it's accessible online and everyone can just open like Pornhub right now, right? But I think the difference is that right now it's harder to regulate, but there's fewer to regulate back then, right? The harm is left untouched. It's like under the side of the house, right? But on the side of the house, like no. But the comparative now is that there is more content, even like a genre profiting from people's trauma has its audience and it's growing, right? This is going to be far harder for you to regulate, especially when it's against vulnerable actors like women and gender minorities, right? Why is then this exclusively worse? I think is that feminism still has the burden to protect or advocate for sex workers. Therefore, celebrating and promoting porn means that you A, open up more doors for you to be exploited, but also B, promote this to be a favorable industry with no clear protection or regulation, exactly because it's developing at such a faster rate than whatever regulation could develop. But also C, I think the demand will be higher disproportionately. Therefore, no time for advocates or influencers to bring meaningful change. But also D, you're not going to be able to be selective on like what platform that you choose because there's more competition. You cannot compete not only with the pretty girls now, but also in general. You're still going to be forced to choose the least profiting one because this is the only option that's viable to you as reinforced by society. Comparatively, protection is going to be more likely to strengthen under a the house because you only work with what's already happening in the struggles, right? Therefore, there's a smaller pool of problems, and you can actually do that as a better environment for trial and error in terms of getting better regulations. But also, lastly, then the rise of right-wing sentiments, insofar that A, fascism is on the rise, like Trump, Prabowo, so forth. I think like traditional or religious conservatism is also on the rise, meaning that what this means is that the sentiment against sex work is very, very hostile. You see them like makes people more violent and rejectful towards whatever you have to say. Even if, for example, feminists don't necessarily want to talk about porn or sexuality, right? Therefore, you're seen as a liberal leftist propaganda worldwide. You worsen sentiment against women. You undermine other structural issues like gender pay gap, so on and so forth. That is much more like inclusive in terms of who it affects, right? Or like right now, it's only stuck at female politicians. This is the shift, the focus that you're going to shift the moment that you celebrate the democratization of porn because you undervalue everything else, exactly because you make sex as the core structural reason why women cannot run. For those reasons, proud to oppose.
We thank the DLO for that speech. That wraps up the opening half. Gentle reminder to give and take your eyes. To start the closing half, we call upon the member of the government. You're here.
Check, am I audible?
Yep, you're on the wall.
Okay. For PI preference, just drop it on the chat box. Then prioritize opening, crossbench. Okay. Starting. Sorry, timer lupa. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I think OG has a great core idea talking about accessibility, how it manifests into more amount of access and whatsoever. But they never really talk about what are the specific difference going to exist in terms of quality and type of contents that are produced. I'm going to picturize to you what are specific contents that are produced in like porn industry right now and how it's going to be better with the democratization or how it has been better with the democratization that exists in status quo. Several pieces of contextualization before my speech. Before that, I think if we can prove to you what are the specific differences that will empower women better, this kind of place us above opening government because they only talk about how there be more access, but they never talk about what are the specific access that are so important for women. If we can mechanize this, it's already enough to make us way above opening government. But several pieces of contextualization. Number one, I think it doesn't mean that on the side of the house doesn't mean we actively endorse this, but this burden of the motion is on whether it suits the interest of feminists or not. It doesn't mean that feminists are going to chip in all of their money to fund porn, for example, it means that we're going to support and celebrate the rise of like the democratization and whatnot. The comparative in their side is a world where non-democratized porn still exists. So insofar as we prove that that we minimize the harm, it's going to make us win this debate. But secondly, I think the democratization actually suits the interest of feminist movement. Why is that? So I'm going to mechanize it later. But the important point here is that don't buy any of OO's points saying that we cannot advocate for anything else whatsoever, because I think sectionality inside feminist movement exists. When we try to celebrate this, doesn't mean that every single campaign aside from this will be neglected whatsoever. I don't really get why feminists can only focus on one specific thing, especially when I told you that we do not chip in money to making porn whatsoever. So I think that OOs just kill their own case. But thirdly, I think the context is status quo, that opening government tried to picture that patriarchal monopoly sexual representation actually exists, but they never mechanize what are the contents that are specifically created by them. There are three key characterization in this. Firstly is the heavy objectification of female voluntary sex worker as passive objects where female pleasure do not matter. But secondly, there's aggression or borderline violence to women that's normalized as a common trait in sex, for example. But thirdly, there are high beauty standards for these women that specific traits, specific skin color are prioritized inside porn industry whatsoever, exactly because they're a patriarchal monopoly. But how does democratization specifically change all of these things? Number one, more access. OG, it's true that there are wider amount of access and more number of contents, but most importantly is on the quality in of itself. It looks like how there are more indie porn content creators, like they do not centralize in studio in Pornhub, for example, but they have their own OnlyFans account. This is important as it shows that female sex workers have ownership and autonomy in making all of these contents. It looks like A, content that focuses on women pleasure, or B, active consent instead of aggression inside of this content. But thirdly, wider range of voluntary sex workers. For example, there are non-binary, trans, and whatsoever who identify as female and who are feminist constituent. I think that endorsement exists in a spectrum, so narrative of consent and body autonomy still exists. I don't understand why everyone suddenly want to become sex workers on all sides of the house. They never really mechanize it. One huge rebuttal to them that's gonna flip their whole case. They talk about, oh, it's gonna give a future signaling that you matter just because you are good at sex. I think women are told that their worth are based on something like looks, for example, in every single industry in status quo. But however, as feminists, we do not oppose women from acting or we not oppose women from modeling. So I don't really understand why just because it creates a certain just because your worth is suddenly valued by a certain metric, then you cannot support all of these things, right? They need to defend why things like acting or modeling are fine. It also gives a symmetrical harm that makes women's worth based on their looks. I don't really understand their principle. But secondly, women are exactly treated as disposable object on their side of the house. Why is that so? Because with democratization, OnlyFans creators now have full agency. It's not only them selling their sex skills, for example, at the videos, but they also show traits that they are human, that they can be funny, they can be smart at the same time whatsoever. I think in pre-democratization, women are only seen as faceless objects that men use to pleasure themselves. Now, women are valued by their personality inside all of these contents. And what's important is that all of these women are consented. So arguably, we are far better because we cater to this specific demography that are most vulnerable. Why is that so? Because those individuals, in most instances, they really want to be sex workers. And their sort of thoughts, they have faced many amount of stigma and like hatred from all around society. The bare minimum that feminist movement can do is to support them when their kind of representation, when what they are doing is actually does not only is actually now create a betterment or advancement inside how they are treated not only as an object anymore. Because regardless on their self-house, women will still be sex objects and they're going to be treated far worse on their self-house. So the weighing is this way. Insofar as women are still going to be there are still some women who are going to be voluntary sex workers. We give them a better protection as we give virtuous signaling that it's going to be that it's fine and that we support them insofar as they are no longer perceived as an object only. That's why we're already above OO from the first place. But next to my own extension, I'm going to talk about viewers' empowerment and why this matters. This extension is unique from OG because it specifically relies on the contextualization on what kind of content are going to be there, which is our contribution. I think sexual pleasure is a biological need that needs to be treated as human rights anywhere on either side of the house. But viewers will still exist on either side, be it male or female. We're talking about female who want to find sex pleasure, for example, or men who want to find sex pleasure, or viewers who just got influenced to porn accidentally, for example, or queer, trans, all of this demography exists. But when they watch porn in status quo, they're faced with patriarchal style porn. Like, A, they feel like having sexual desire as a woman or as a minority is abnormal, and authorization objectifying women, that women should just follow everything that male do. But secondly, they project things like aggression, coercion as a normal sex, and it's translated into real world relationships that they're trying to build. Thirdly, they have internalized for like a specific intersection. They feel internalized shame and stigma to lesbian or trans, for example, who are often dehumanized in many male-centric porn. I think this is significant. Yes, I'm gonna take that.
Even if like you're gonna advocate for other issues, then how big is democratizing sex gonna forward the feminist movement?
Yeah, you never explain why it cannot exist at hand in hand, so I don't really get the relevance of your case. How do we solve it on ourselves, the house? Firstly, I think content will be far more diverse. For example, centers around women pleasure and all of those things. So women are going to feel more empowered that it's fine for me to have sexual desire. This is important, and this touches the most amount of people. This case is the most holistic one because I think regardless of everyone has sexual pleasure, and this kind of feeling that it's okay to have sexual pleasure is a benefit that is exclusively proven by our picturization of the world. But secondly, and more importantly, we're talking about individuals who are oftentimes become victim of this perception of ideal sex that are picturized in porns. We're talking about how power, asymmetry of power exists and whatsoever. On their side of the house, this kind of women are very easy to be manipulated by men, and they are treated badly in such relationship because there is a unclear power dynamics. On our side of the house, we solve this by giving a better picturization of how sex should look like, and that make them less likely to be manipulated and also to do things. Why is this argument debate winning? Because ultimately, feminists want all of this constituent to be able to exercise their right, and this is something that exclusively happen in our side of the house. For that, I just want to say that I'm really grateful to speak in this round with everyone here. Thank you.
We thank the MG for that speech. To start to talk about member. You're here.
Am I audible?
Yep, you're audible.
Thanks. Give me a second. Let me turn on my camera. Trigger warning, I'm going to talk about a lot of sensitive things related to objectification and domination of women. So a lot of these things are for the purpose of this debate. I hope that this warning flags out the potential content that I'm going to be elaborating in my speech. I think opening debate is very uncharitable because there was no explanation as to why a lot of the things that they say are contextually timely and factual to the way in which people do perceive pornography right now. I think opening opposition's mistake is always trying to operate on the fact that perhaps, it's going to be only filled with exploitation. But even when there is, for example, agency within the pornography industry, we're going to explain to you why on the audience basis it's going to be bad. But on top of everything, I think opening government tries to, frame by explaining that perhaps like it's going to be a form of celebration whatsoever. In the best case where they do consent, I'm going to talk about why this is a form of manipulation. So what's the biggest contribution in closing opposition? We're going to talk to you about why celebration of the democratization of the porn industry is a form of manipulation to the perception of sex by women. 3 things I want to discuss in this speech. 1, what are the interests of the feminist movement? I think A, it's protecting women by ensuring that women can make informed decisions and preventing them from manipulation. I think I agree with opening government that women are rational and they're able to weigh out the things that are good for them. But in the case in which I think you see a lot of the times in society, these industries can be very manipulative. They give you a lot of profit, they give you a lot of benefit, but eventually when you opt into it, it's going to be very problematic. This is exactly why protection is very important when it's needed on the most vulnerable. But number 2, I think pornography debates are a debate on women's bodies. So we should refer to the fact that feminists want a celebration of women, and this is proven by past prerequisites. Like there is, like all bodies are beautiful whatsoever. We're going to explain to you why this does not happen as well. But thirdly, is also the fact that feminists want women to be sexy, but not in a way that they are forced, in which this also entails to the fact that there is an expression that should not be manipulated or coerced specifically in this process, because it doesn't only entail to the fact that this is only affecting the general conversation about women within society, but also the way in which the husbands view the wives inside of the bedroom because of how normalized porn are. Yeah, that's exactly, I think, what becomes the main interest of feminist movement, right? But the second part I want to talk about in the speech is the idea of how then the democratization twists the narrative of sex for women in two ways. One, I think when you democratize porn, it limits the expression of desire coming towards women. Why? Two reasons. A, I think domination becomes a norm within sex, which then devalues the freedom of expression of desire that women have because men are constantly shifted to push women to submit. It's very true when both Goff says that the people that you want to cater to are incels and patriarchal men, but this is what they like. And in the process of democratizing the porn, the types of newer porn that are going to be distributed are these kinds of pornographies that are most likely going to be highly accessible, even when they claim that, oh, there's probably going to be market segmentation, but that's not the truth because the general form or the kinds of porn that people know are these types of dominating unnecessary shit. But number two, I think women are always expected then to act hyper feminine and have big breasts and tight vaginas. These standards exist. Why? In the locker room and private chat conversations that men have, they are oriented on looks to enjoy desire because for the longest time, this is something that the feminist movement is trying to combat is the fact that women's or the term male gaze is something that, kind of creates the perception in which how men try to view women. So this is why in Indonesia, extremely bigoted individuals enjoy things such as tobrut, because this is the way in which they try to diminish the meaning of women and their existence. Why is this bad? One, this erases the expression of women in bed specifically because this is publicly accessible and people think that it's okay for you to constantly be violent towards your wives in the bedroom. But number two, this erases women who do not fill in the standards because they cannot act hyper feminine, have big breasts whatsoever. If feminist movement is all about inclusion, we ought not to only benefit a certain demography of women that can be benefited in this process if we were even to bite the bullet coming from government side of the house. This is discriminatory. But two, I think empowerment is very limited because they try to tell you in Gov Bench that you can be empowered, you can feel good about yourself. Because here's the thing, the only way where you can feel empowered is when there is a narrative where the negatives do not outweigh the good or the positives, right? But what does the context look like right now? One thing that makes my speech makes my POI matter a lot to Chakal's arguments is the fact that I asked them what happens to the, demography of individuals that you cannot change that stay bigoted, because the continuing of rape culture is something that's likely to happen because there's an ongoing and forward-looking process of democratization that touches on the demography of people who access porn. Why is this likely? Because there's no counterbalance narrative panels. Like, you tell them that, hey, it's okay if we democratize porn, but you're the same movement that's going to counter them at the same time. This is something that cannot coexist because this confuses the people and this continues, for example, the cycle of bigoted men trying to objectify women. But number two, I think government side of the house never really explained to you why the counter narrative of why women get empowered. It's okay to let go of the other population of women that can be disenfranchised specifically from this narrative. This is exactly why this argument is debate winning. But the third then, I want to talk about, the portion of the debate talks about how this is economically good for some women because probably they do not have any other choices. Why is this a form of manipulation of job security? Three reasons. One, I think the barrier of entry is most likely going to be very low because there is democratization. But exactly, that is the problem where it becomes very much accessible. So since the job market is crashing, you don't have, for example, any internships. The opportunities with lower qualification of the porn industry makes sense for a lot of these people, but they will try to opt in to get the benefits that is being promised. But two, sustainability, even if you were to talk about how women can get profit whatsoever, is not long-term and very much uncertain. Benefits are not certain in the pornographic industry due to the fact that people perceive women from the male gaze. I've already characterized this before. So it is extremely important to take into consideration that even when access exists, they do not have an audience because probably they are deemed as less attractive options. So even when they say that, there's a demography of women that's going to be catered to, who are you trying to cater to? Because these are the most vulnerable individuals that we don't understand understand and we don't get why it's going to be benefited on your side. But lastly, I think there's a manipulation of consent to the commodification of women's bodies. In the process of democratization, there is a romanticization process panels of the pornography industry. This looks like porn stars being paid to say that the industry is good, but this also comes with the fact that the promise that the industry is going to be beneficial. One, they do not have the larger incentive than if this is the norm to fight back when they know that there are people that are continuously objectifying them. Why? Since this is a profession in the middle of capitalism that they try to concede on their side of the house, women will always constantly have to concede and submit to weird requests just for the sake of money because you're brainwashing these women that you don't have any alternatives. This is exactly why bigots can continue to stay. These are all explanations as to why this is not something that's good, it's not inclusive, not within the interest of feminist movement. Proud.
Sorry, I cannot hear you, Kak Ariel, but like, could you hear me? Because your voice is
Right, hi. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, it's very clear.
Okay, we call upon the government whip. Here.
Right, checking in is if my voice is audible or not.
You're very audible and clear visually.
Right. Okay. Should there be any POIs? Please just like give it through chat. Oh. Right. Any views that I say in this debate not represent myself, so that's a disclaimer. But yeah. Shout out to Danish for making it this far. Anyways. Before I forgot my timer, hold on. I forgot my timer like in semis, so. Right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. One observation that I see in this debate is no one understand what kind of society or the world that women are living in right now. This is exactly the problem with closing opposition because they are not realistic. Because, they want to erase all of this, stigmatization or objectification of women, i.e. men seeing women as like having beauty standards and whatever in the locker room. We think that it will happen in the status quo because right now we are living in a very patriarchal world. So what I'm trying to say to you is that your path to victory, CO, is basically unattainable because you need structural reforms and feminist movement just to say to you that they don't have any resources whatsoever to make that structural reforms. So this is basically unattainable. I also want to criticize I also want to criticize that this is exactly what is the most important thing for feminist movement. We need to be realistic. We need to understand what is the kind of status quo that we live in right now and adjust accordingly what kind of movement that we want to organize. And this is exactly the path to win for closing opposition. Let's try to portray and empathize what women are going to right now in the status quo. I'll say we live in an already patriarchal society. How we dress, how we look, our beauty standards, for example, what makes us valuable right now is already very male gaze, and unfortunately this is translated to how porn is perceived, and porn is one of the outcome of this male gazeness in the status quo. But let's try to empathize, right? What are these sex workers are currently facing in the status quo? I don't think this woman wants to work as a sex worker at the very first place, but sadly, perhaps they see this as a lucrative way of gaining money because there is demand. This is the problem, judges. It's very hard to control men or the demand of which the porn exists. We cannot control all of this, men that are horny and whatever. So at the end of the day, the only way for us to empower this woman who don't have any choices, for example, is to accept them, is to recognize them, and because at the end of the day, there's no way for us to, change or remove demand because this is out of our limit. So our case of accepting women as they are, no matter like what kind of background you are right now, is a very important case. Why is this so? I'm going to engage to OO and CO in regards towards this explanation. First thing first, OO wants to say that, hey, feminist movement shouldn't regulate or give resources towards this porn, which is very objectifying. We say that yes, in the status quo, porn is very objectifying, but this is the only way for us to empower them, because the comparative in our side of the house is for you to empower the sex worker is by giving them jobs in offices. Massive capital is required for you to give jobs, and you need to alleviate poverty, for example, or you need to provide a safe working space, for example, which I think it is not attainable for feminist movement, because this is something that is very structural, and your government people that are currently in your member of representative are all males, so this is very hard to change it structurally. Second of all, I think insofar that this is very long rooted, in their case, the only way for them to shut down all of this objectification whatsoever is to shut down porn channels, i.e. like Pornhub or OnlyFans, which I think is not something that our government is doing. Because government could not do this, and feminist movement could not do anything for it, the only way for us to empower women that are currently inside of the industry is for us to understand that these women are empowered, that eventually that these women are empowered, that eventually they are seen as someone that is human and whatsoever. What do we mean by this? What I mean by this is that feminist movement role is to accept that these women that currently working as a sex worker, that we care and we make them feel seen. How does that look like, right? First, we remove the male-centric porn, like we remove the narration that porn is something that is male-centric. In our side of the house, we celebrate the democratization of porn, so that it's something that is woman can also consume, that woman also can also gain entertainment of. And second of all, I think the way that we make them feel seen is that we condemn, as a feminist movement, revenge sex or unconsented sex as a way of proper entertainment that is currently happening in the status quo. And thirdly, we think that the implication that is more important is how woman-centrism is going to be the most important voice inside of the sex worker, and also how porn is going to be distributed. It looks like women that are currently, working as a sex worker, they celebrate their body, for example. They feel proud of themselves, because this is the kind of, we can take a parallel example such as like modeling or film that Danesh has already said. It is a very objectified by male. It's very full of male gaze, but women there are feel empowered and very proud of their body. We could make that parallel example in sex workers also. So instead of condemning them for objectifying or like selling their body, we think that given the context of status quo where feminist movement couldn't have anything to do because this is something that is very structural, the only way for us to strategically empower this woman is to shift all of this male centrism towards a more woman-centric approach inside of inside of the porn industry. Let's try to compare ourselves with opening government, right? Why eventually opening government basically falls under closing government? Because we think that opening government promises big things. They want like quality, and they want like better quantity or like access or like liberation towards this woman and reformation and intersectionality and whatsoever. We think that this is too big of a burden panel. And if you want change, you want reform, all of this is very contingent towards the government already not being, already recognizing all of the women and gender minorities, right? So we question, how are all of your impact is going to be mechanized? Because like, it is not that suddenly all of the policymaker will be woman-centric, because all of this policymaker in the status quo still dismiss women and gender minorities, right? We think that there's no reformation whatsoever that is going to happen. So insofar that there's no analysis how this will prevail, eventually opening governments loses. Closing government, in comparative, we promise you that women that are currently in a state that are very vulnerable, in which they cannot get out, and the only way for them is to be recognized by their sisters inside of the community, is they are very feel empowered. This is already 6:38, by the way. You can open your eye. So in comparative to all teams, insofar that there's no empathy being analyzed of how woman is currently doing, and how opposition wants to buy things about in regards towards objectification whatsoever, which is literally, we cannot deny that currently we already live in a very patriarchal society and we cannot do anything about it. This is the only way, this is the only strategic thing that feminist movement could do, and that is exactly closing government's path of victory. Very proud to win.
We thank the government for that speech from this debate up as a whole with all of the opposition. Here.
Am I clearly audible and visible?
Yes, you are audible and visible.
Okay, wait. POI through chat, starting my speech, and 3, 2, 1. What has Rizky provided to you? Rizky provided that porn industry is not a promising industry, but rather dangerous industry built out of manipulation that takes away women's consent. And as feminist women, you should not support that or celebrate that, right? I think I will just engage directly to each benches. Firstly, to closing government. What CG wants is a world where everyone available to express their choices in the form of independent porn industry as women, non-binary, etc. to counter standard of sex expression or perception in the status quo. In order to win, CG needs to explain why sex is not a personal and unique experience to oneself. The logic is simple. Sex is a natural drive. We always have many channels to learn about sex because it's biology. We have education class. We have our mothers and fathers in a progressive status quo that would teach you how to use condom, for example. Even in the Quran and Sunnah, the Prophet teach Muslims how to have respectful sex with their wives. So long as closing government never explain why perception of sex should only be through porn industry, their argument is not exclusive, that's first. But moreover, they never prove to you why the more people know how to perceive sex, the better the protection will be for the woman, because they never defend to you why the perception of sex coming from porn industry is the right perception when it is a very unique and personal experience to oneself, right? If the problem is diversity, I think people from marginalized groups like minority or LGBTQ plus always have their own form of self-expression. That's why we have drag race, for example. That's why queers in Indonesia have their own language and so on and so forth. Their argument is regarding diversity and so on and so forth, only able to stand if they can prove that form of self-expression should always be commercialized. Form of wanting to show people that you can have sex should always be commercialized. So long they cannot prove that commercialization is the prerequisite of self-expression, of how to show people that you can have sex, meaning their argument on expression in general cannot run, right? If in the whip, CG suddenly want to frame that sex is a way for women to be seen by shifting the male-centered industry, they need to prove why then many women equals more power to shift the rooted bigotry in porn industry that Rizky have already provided to you. Notice that they're being very dismissive on this characterization, because this happened in other sectors like culinary industry, right? Even if we have many women who can cook, doesn't mean the chef's job is controlled by women's narrative, but rather it's still controlled by men. We only know mainstream celebrities, chefs that are men, for example. This is because the industry is very rooted in men's desire, right? The men in the industry have prior money, for example. They have prior connection. Men own the production houses of porn industry since the very long ago, for example. Those prior things, as a woman, suddenly wanting to democratize this industry and so on and so forth, you cannot compete with those prior resources. Like they already settled and they already built kingdom of porn industry since a very long time ago. That's why their argument regarding advancing the porn industry cannot work, because you cannot define how do you compete with those prior resources that men have already gathered in their bigotry industry, right? What is the weighing? So the framing of closing opposition is very simple. We agree that this is a lost cause motion. Either side might not be able to fully erase the harm of porn. We oppose because we don't want to forward and advance the already harmful industry. What we want is to at least making it inaccessible so that the barrier is high, and that barrier is exactly the form of protection giving informed consent to women by not romanticizing the dangerous industry, by showing you the downsides of the industry. Meanwhile, government bench provide no protection at all by forwarding the industry that support the culture of objectifying women whatsoever, right? Let's engage to opening government. In order to win against opening government, and also CG to some extent, CO only needs to prove that the porn industry is inherently and innately harmful to the point that even if the woman consent is still not a valid consent, and even if many many women are within the industry, women will never take back any kind of power, right? We told you that what looks like consent must be taken into context. The context of the porn industry is not only about the men, but it's about the inherent nature of men to override women, to control how women looks like in the bedroom, to channel sex drive that's somehow too inappropriate to do it with their spouses in the real life. That's why they're making it through pornographic content. Rizky pointed out that exactly the basis of the industry is to show dominance over women through manipulation or through degradation to some extent. So in the principle level, consenting to be overridden by the natural power gap between men and women should not be a valid consent due to how it's harming the principle of agency over women's bodies. As a feminist movement, in a principle level, you have the responsibility to intervene if something devalue woman as an individual. But moreover, in the practical individual level, you can see in the process of making pornographic content, the content was often invalid, which is supported by the causing government. Women opting into porn industry because of economic pressure. Women opting into porn industry because of peer pressure with OnlyFans trend, for example. Women opting because there's the only available opportunities for them. But moreover, the process of democratization will romanticize the porn industry because they want to gather more audience. They want to gather more woman power, like women, they gather more women to opt in into the industry and so on and so forth. Meaning, most likely the promotion of accessibility will hide the downside, right? Meaning, if they say yes and sign the contract, it's a consent made out of manipulation. Meaning, it's invalid. How does this logic true? Rizky have explained to you that porn industry is not a promising industry. There are so many unworthy, uncontrollable risks like health risks and so on and so forth. Meaning, in a normal situation, women would not opt into those kind of industry at the very first place, right? If so we don't care. We don't care that OG thinks some women are ugly. We don't think so. But moreover, we don't care if it's accessible because it should have not been accessible at the very first place because it's an industry that is made out of bigotry. It's an industry that is made out of an invalid consent taken away from the woman in itself, right? The way is that we point out that the principle of consent is not available in porn, where manipulation exists. But moreover, the pragmatic analysis that the industry will not progress already provided to you. We already provided to you better logical analysis of how men controlled industry will always be controlled by men and so on and so forth, right? But moreover, I think let's engage to opening opposition to some extent to differentiate ourselves. Leader of opposition only talks about that the industry is principally objectifying women. We stand in the causing opposition that regardless of the outcome, the fact that the industry was built upon manipulation to take away women consent, and even if many women are there, does not mean women will have control to topple down the bigotry and the objectification of women in itself, right? They also talk about the illusion of independence. I think Rizky provided better nuance in the context of whether porn is a promising industry or not, characterizing that no sane woman would opt into a dangerous industry that's made out of manipulation, that's made out of milking your anxiety over job security and so on and so forth. But moreover, they try to do one-liners like sex workers regulation and urgency in right-wing populism rights and so on and so forth, which is underdeveloped. But we think even if it's true, I think we provide better logical analysis and nuances on why, under our side of the house, if we oppose the celebrations of democratization of pornographic content, we don't open the gap for exploitation, or we don't open the gap for more harm towards the woman in itself, and so on and so forth. We're very proud to oppose.
Thank you, opposition for that speech. And that wraps up the NOVED 2025 Open Grand Finals. Yay! Virtually cross floors and shake hands to one another. Yeah, and looking forward to at the closing ceremony. Thank you, everyone. Judges, let us go to room 2.